I'm a spiritual medium and intuitive coach, and it's my goal in life to help everybody discover that they have an intuition. They don't have to be special to seek out psychic abilities. And I spend my life helping people connect to their spirit guides and being able to connect with the wisdom that lives within.
Perfect. I did see on one of your interviews that you didn't actually, like, unlike most mediums, you didn't actually have this awareness of this ability from a very young age. It's most grow up kind of with strange things happening to them, whereas you seem to have come to it a little bit later on. So how did that happen?
Yeah, and so I mean, I want to start this by saying that I really, really, truly believe we all have intuitive abilities. We're all born with it. The question is whether we're willing to sort of seek it out or become aware of it and then strengthen those abilities. So if I look back now and I look into my childhood, definitely after I really actively went looking at my gifts and trying to connect with spirit guides, I know I've had some experiences as a child that I potentially were chalked up to a nightmare, but I remember waking up and seeing things at the end of my bed and being scared by them, kind of going, what is that? And, I have very loving parents, but they don't know anything about this stuff. And they told me it was a nightmare, right? And so you kind of just, put it in that category and move on with your life. And then once I did sort of learn to develop these skills, I definitely, when I finally connected with my own spirit guides and really was able to see them clearly, I kind of went, hey, I remember you. You used to sit at the end of my bed when I was a kid. So I do say, it's probably always been there. I just didn't actively pursue it, right? Or know about it. Yeah, know what it was. And I think that if everyone were to sort of think back a little bit, a lot of us maybe chalked it up to our imagination, but we all have these abilities and they're all there. It's just a matter of remembering them and connecting to them. So yeah, but I can jump ahead to my story as to sort of how I discovered them a little bit. And so for me, and this is really the thing I love to say, is that your spirit guides are working with you, whether you're know about them or not, right? They're always kind of sending hints, sending nudges. Your intuition's always there. And my story to discovering these abilities was really because of that and the guidance that was happening all the way through. And so for me, I never expected doing anything else in my life besides being an elementary school teacher. I love kids. I love working with little kids, and it's all I ever worked towards. And so that was sort of what I pursued. And I remember even in teachers college starting to get these little niggling feelings in my gut of there's something about this career that just doesn't feel right for me. I'm not sure what it is, but something doesn't align here. And again, I kind of just ignored it because here in Canada, teaching's a really solid career. It's good pay and good benefits, and my family was really supportive of it. So I kind of kept going. And when I finally got into the field, year after year, the circumstances would get more and more challenging and more difficult. And there were just more things that were pushing me towards this isn't right, and me feeling more and more miserable about the career. So, one year I'd have a really difficult class with really exceptional behaviors. The next year, a really difficult colleague whose classroom I shared. The next year, a really challenging principal who was breathing down everyone's necks, right? Just it was just getting harder and harder and harder. And my body was also rejecting it, right? I was getting sick. You could mark it on a calendar. Every 3 weeks on the dot, Jessica's going to get sick. And again, I chalked it up to, I work with kids. That's what happens, right? And I also was ridden with anxiety. And I never experienced so much anxiety as I did as a teacher. And I, whether it was about planning and what am I going to do the next day and all of these things, but it was getting more and more and ramping up more and more. And I found myself dreading going to work every day. And just thinking in my head, this cannot be the next 30 plus years of my life. I can't do this. And I ignored it because, again, it's a good job. And I was a big people pleaser, and I wanted to please my family and the people around me who said this was a good career. So do it. And so one day I was on my way to work and really just hating life. I was like, I don't want to go to work today. It was particularly freezing cold day. And my car spun out on some black ice. And I spun and then slammed into a frozen snowbank. The whole right side of my car door came off and the wheel. Like that's how hard I hit it. And I got a nice concussion in the process. And so I was given, the doctor was like, you need to take a break. You have a concussion, take a couple weeks off school, recover from this injury. You can't be on screens. And I remember being so relieved and so thankful that I had this time off. And it was right before the Christmas holidays. And so, I recovered from the concussion and then was getting ready to go back to school. And I think the day or two before, I got cleared to go skiing with my husband and some friends. And when I was skiing, I had every plan to go back to work at the end of the weekend. But I was wearing rental skis and I fell in a really weird way. And my boots didn't disconnect from my skis. So I went one way, but my feet went the other and just tore my knee apart. Yep. Just ripped it right out. Yep. And so I got a phone call from HR the night before I was supposed to go back. How's your concussion? You ready to come back? I went, well, actually, I'm in crutches now. And they went, okay, you just had a concussion and now you're in crutches. You're a liability to us. You are going to trip on the slippery stairs and we're on the schoolyard. We can't have you at school until there's no more ice on the ground. And so they gave me, at that point, it was January. They gave me 5 months off to recover because they were like, we just can't have you at school right now. So I remember being so relieved to have that time off. And my husband turned to me and he said, well, if you aren't sure you want to be a teacher, now's your time to figure out what else you're going to do with your life. And I'm thankful he said that. He pushed me and I kind of went, okay, well, at the very least, if I can't figure out something else to do, I've got to get a handle on this anxiety of mine. I can't go to work feeling this anxious every single day. It's just not sustainable. And so that's when I took this time to really seek out methods of helping anxiety. And the only thing I thought of was learn how to meditate. Yep, exactly. And so I knew a woman who had been a former teacher. I had met her back in teachers college who she decided no longer to pursue teaching and to homeschool her kids, but she also ran these women's meditation circles in her home every week. And so I reached out to her. She invited me to come. And I remember this is the first time I'd ever meditated in my life. I'd never done anything of the sort. I was not a spiritual person at the time. And I just remember feeling such peace from myself. I'd never had a break from the anxiety that was constantly running through my body, that feeling of anxiousness. And so I became addicted. I couldn't stop going to her classes. She would have these meetings sometimes twice a week in her homes. I went to every single one because I just wanted that feeling and I didn't know how to replicate it myself. And I remember going to these and, I had 5 months off of work. So I was going fairly often, practicing meditation with her. And I remember speaking to her, and the women who attended this group were very spiritual individuals, right? They were very much talking about knocking the matrix, and a lot of them were homeschooling moms who didn't want their kids in the mainstream, all these things that I'd never heard about. And I remember going up to the woman who ran the circles, and I said, I just know in my guts I'm not supposed to be a teacher anymore, but I don't know what the heck I'm supposed to do with my life. And I can't remember if it was her or another one of the women's, but they said, well, why don't you ask your spirit guides? And they'll tell you what you're supposed to do. And I was like, my what? What's a spirit guide? So she showed me that there was an app, Insight Timer, has free meditations, but there are specific meditations you can do to connect to these beings of light who will literally tell you what your path and purpose is in this lifetime. And I kind of went, all right, well, curious enough, I'll give it a try. So I went home and I started doing these meditations. Some of them were an hour, 2 hours long of these deep, deep meditations to help you connect with your guides. And I just wanted this one answer. If I'm not supposed to be a teacher, what the heck am I supposed to do? And it took me a couple of months, but eventually I started to see things in my mind's eye. And I started to get messages, signs and symbols, and little glimpses of what I now know to be my spirit guides. And I'll never forget the very first time that I got a message that actually worked in real life. And I was like, what is this? I can't believe this. The very first time I was asking, if I'm not supposed to be a teacher, send me a sign. And the thing I saw in my mind was a lion. And I was like, well, what does that mean? That's not helpful. And I started Googling it. What is the spiritual meaning of a lion? And none of it made sense. And then I went to a friend's house the next day just to go visit with her. And her little 4-year-old son, the second I walked through the door, he grabbed me by the arm. He's like, Jessica, I have to show you something. And he pulled me up to the second floor. And on the second floor landing, there was a little table with knickknacks. And he pointed to this figurine of a lion. And I like, my jaw hit the floor because I'd just seen that in meditation the day before. And I went, why did you want to show me that? And he got all embarrassed and he ran and goes, I don't know, and he ran away. And I went, oh my God, like my guides are trying to show me, like, yes, you're not supposed to be a teacher, right? There's your confirmation. So things like this were starting to happen slowly, slowly. I was getting little signs and symbols and messages through my intuitive development. And it was finally a little bit later that I met another woman at these meditation circles, and she claimed to be a reflexologist, but she said she specialized in helping people with anxiety. So I was like, well, I gotta see what you have to do. My husband also had anxiety, and he agreed to come with me. We booked appointments. My husband's not into the woo-woo stuff at the time. He's changed now, but at the time he wasn't. And he said, if I'm going to this woman, like, you're coming in the room with me because I don't know what's going on here. And so he went first. She laid him out on a table and she started doing like reflexology on his feet and like energy healing, like Reiki kind of thing. And I'm sitting on the floor, just like enjoying the music, meditating a little bit, just enjoying the atmosphere. She starts calling in all these beings of light. She calls in Archangel Michael and, the purple flame of Saint Germain. And she starts calling in all these names I'd never heard of, but I'm sitting there and I see them come into the room. I see these beings. I see the color of their auras. I see these beings hovering over my husband. And I'm like, my eyes were open. Like, what's happening? And so I see all of this and my jaw just hit the floor, and the energy that I felt in the room was just, I can't even describe it. It was so magical. And so she finished working on my husband, and I went up to her and I was like, when you call it in so-and-so, does he look like this? And this one, does he have an aura this color? And like, was I seeing that? Like, and she goes, yeah, that's what they look like. And so she didn't tell people this, but she claimed she was just a reflexologist so people could claim it for their health insurance, but she was a medium. She just never was outward about it. I mean, she's much older than me, and, it was more out there to say that out loud, to tell people up front. And so I told her, I was like, you've got to show me how you did that. You've got to mentor me. This is what I want to do. And so she'd never mentored anyone before, but she agreed to help show me the tricks of the trader, what she had learned through her practice. And so I started going to her home every week, once a week, for as much time as I had left before I had to go back to school, as a couple months. And she showed me everything I needed to know: how to ground myself, how to call in the guides, right? How to protect myself, what it looks like to channel loved ones, what it looks like to channel other beings of light. She showed it all. She showed me how to astral travel. She showed me everything. And, and between compiling that, and then I just dove into every podcast, book, or, resource I could find, finally started to get my groove and connect. Not only my first experience was connecting with loved ones of my own great grandparents who had passed away, and getting really accurate information that, my parents were like, there's no way you could have known that kind of stuff. And then finally connecting with my own spirit guides and getting the information, and then being able to do it for other people. And when I finally was starting to get those clear messages, and I kind of asked my guides that one question that I really wanted the answer to: if I'm not supposed to be a teacher, what am I supposed to do? And they went, this, Jessica, you're supposed to do this. You're supposed to channel us, and you're supposed to help people who are in the same position as you, who are off their path, who need to find their path and purpose. You're going to help them get back into alignment. And I finished out the rest of that school year, but I quit at the end of the summer, and I've been doing this full time ever since.
Very interesting journey. So,
yeah.
yeah. So yours was one through, I suppose, experience later on, and then interest, as opposed to having been brought up with it as a natural inherent gift, as many people claim. So what was it? You mentioned as well that your husband was initially very skeptical of this kind of thing and has switched over now. So what was it or what has it been that's made him kind of become more open?
Around?
Yeah.
Yeah, it took him a few years. I'm not going to lie. Even after I had already started this as a career and I was doing it full time, he didn't really want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. It scared him. He was very superstitious. He was raised from a really orthodox religious family. And so for him, this was like a no-no, like, you don't do this, right? And so it scared him. And I think what made him come around, there was a couple of things. One, he started to see how much it was really helping people to really see what their path and purpose was in life. And these emails I was getting about how, not to toot my own horn, but how life-changing these messages were from their guides. And I always say, like, it's not me, I'm just the messenger, right? I'm just connecting them with their beings of light. But, so he was starting to see that the life changes that were happening for people and how meaningful that was. And he finally, just out of his own curiosity, asked me for a session and he just wanted to see what it was. And it was profound for him. And he's kind of been asking me for sessions almost every week since. And so it took him, but it did take about 3 years before he finally came around. So I just let him be. I let him go on his own journey and his own sort of inquiry, and see. And he also came to meditation his own way, through trying to find, cure to his own anxiety through different mentors, different teachers. He definitely wanted more of a male perspective on the whole situation. But yeah, I definitely had to sort of let it be. And, I know there's really a lot of us when we go through the spiritual awakening, we're like, this is amazing. Like, my life is so changed. And we want to tell everybody around us, like, you've got to try this. We want to push it on them because we want them to feel how amazing we feel. And I find that tends to like push people away. It scares them. And so you really just have to let them come around. And the only thing you can do is be the example. And they kind of go, you're radiating, you're glowing. Like, what Kool-Aid are you drinking? I want some, kind of a thing, in the best sense possible. But, it really does sort of happen when you lead by example. And so I had to just let it be and let him come to it on his own. And it took him some time, but he got there.
Before we continue, a brief note for those who want to go a bit deeper into this work. In addition to the public conversations you hear on the podcast, I also create member-only calm analysis videos. These are structured responses to skeptical arguments, spiritual claims, and research discussions that deserve slower, more careful examination. They're not about defending a position or attacking one. They're about taking a single claim and asking, what is actually being assumed here? What follows from it, and where does uncertainty remain? Members also receive early access to upcoming podcast episodes and shorts. Audio versions of those analyses are available through my Apple Podcast subscription, which includes an initial 2-month period free trial. So if you value this kind of careful, non-tribal exploration, membership simply helps sustain the time and space required to do it properly. Now, let's return to the conversation. Now, when you talk about the quote unquote, veridical aspects of these things, where, as you say, the lion example, your great grandparent example, where things just you seem to be receiving accurate information. One of the more, I suppose, skeptical takes on these sort of things that I hear a lot about mediumship is, what about all the times that you saw something in your mind's eye that didn't come to pass? Statistically, it's likely, even if mediumship isn't real, that some of these things would come to be, just that you forget of all of those that don't. And especially, as you say, during your meditations, when you started meditating and you would get into this state and then see certain things and flashes in your mind, many would say, well, that, of course, that's just, what your mind does. That's why we dream when we sleep. It's just your mind kind of coming up with all these random things. Statistically, some things are going to seem weird that and coincidental that happen. What would you say to that argument?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I guess I'll say a couple of things. A lot of it comes to trusting yourself, right? And trusting that the messages that are coming through really are valid in some way. And, I say when we're doing that very beginning piece, because this was really at the beginning of my journey, and that is the experience for most people, is that we get a sign or we get a message, and maybe it comes to fruition and maybe it doesn't. And that's when we start to be able to distinguish, was that my own mind? Did I come up with something in my own imagination versus was it actually a channeled message? And the ones that are actually channeled messages, when it does appear in your real life, in your waking life, it's going to hit you between the eyes. You're not going to be able to deny it. Like, it's not going to be, I saw a heart and then like, oh, but I see hearts everywhere, like, or a flower. There are flowers everywhere, robins or whatever. It's going to be something that is so undeniable that you'll know that you channeled it. And yes, of course, our mind does do things, and you do have to start to get familiar with, what does it feel like to be in a situation where I'm actually connected, where I'm channeling. And when you start to do certain things to build up that trust muscle, and you really know what it feels like to be channeling, and you're able to make some of those delineations between my own mind, my own thoughts, and what it looks like to channel, then we can start to realize which ones are from me and which ones are from spirit. And there are some tips and tricks definitely that I can provide on how you can do that, for sure. But I'll give another example of like how it's going to be so blatantly obvious. Like it's going to blare you in the face. I remember I was teaching a workshop and I had, she's a friend of mine now. And it was, I was teaching people like, we're going to ask our guides for a sign to send us our sign in our real life that we're, whether it was to ask a question, whether they were on the right path with the decision they were making. And she goes, Jessica, this is so weird, but like I saw a pineapple in my mind. Like, what is a pineapple? Like, and again, it's not about interpreting what a pineapple means. It's they're saying, this is the sign we're going to send you. And this woman, she works at a children's shoe store, and she was at work the next day or a couple days later. She was just in her shoe store, and these two little girls walked into the store. She'd never met them before. They were wearing these shirts with giant shiny pineapples on their t-shirts. And they ran up to her as soon as they walked in the store and gave her a hug. She never met these kids before, and they're hugging her. And she called me, and she was like, I can't believe this. Literally, the pineapples hugged me, right? These two little girls. So, like, it's so, like, it's not like, oh, I saw a bowl of fruit, right? I must have been making that up. It's like the two girls wearing giant pineapple shirts came and gave me a hug. I can't deny that, right? It's so obvious and blatant. So there is a distinction that you do have to make between was I channeling or was I not? And did I make it up or did I not? And when the sign comes through, it's going to be so blaringly obvious that you're not going to be able to deny that you made that up.
So with that example, with the pineapples, you say this was a lady who was questioning whether to change career or not. Is that right?
No, I think actually, yes, you're right. It was whether she wanted to change career. That's exactly what it was.
So following that sign, did that sign of the girls with the pineapple shirts hugging her, did that lead to any change in her career?
Yeah, I mean, it was the sign that she needed. I mean, it was COVID at the time, and she was the prices were crazy. She wasn't getting a lot of business, and she did eventually quit her job and move to something else. This wasn't the sign, like it wasn't the only thing that kind of pushed her over, but it was this confirmation that she needed, right? That like I'm on the wrong side of this, right? Like if the question was, do I quit my job? Show me a sign that I'm supposed to quit my job, and she sees that sign. She's like, okay, I got to start taking steps to move my way out of this. Yeah. So it did act as confirmation. And of course, I do want to say that is just like very, very surface level of working with signs. When you connect directly to your spirit guides, they will talk to you. They will tell you exactly what you're supposed to do. They'll tell you yes or no and give you full sentences. I have clients who come to me and they, we channel their guides and they're like, here's your past life. Here's the unfinished business you have. Therefore, this is your path. This is your purpose. This is your career that you need to make. And here are the exact steps you need to take. You need a podcast with this name. You need to make a website with these colors. Like they're that specific. So yes, asking for signs is like a great way to dip your toe in the water and start to recognize like, yes, I am intuitive and I can connect. But then the goal ultimately is to start having real meaningful conversations with your guides so that the information is just so clear.
So your primary task, I suppose, with mediumship, as opposed to most when we think about mediums, we usually think about connecting to people who have died. So your main aspect of mediumship, it seems, is to more contact through spirit guides.
Yes. And you know what? I should really change this because I was actually corrected. I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago and she goes, Jessica, when you say you're a medium, people automatically assume you're channeling people who have passed away. And she says, what you are is called the channel. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that, that there was such a clear distinction there. So yes, I can access loved ones who are on the other side because I really believe once you connect to your intuition, it's all possible. You can do all of those things. But yes, I definitely prefer to work with spirit guides. That's the thing that is sort of like my niche and that I enjoy. I found with loved ones that although it can be very healing for the grieving, I didn't feel it to be as helpful for the person's ultimate life, if that makes sense. Like it's good to talk to them and connect and like share memories, but your loved ones can't necessarily provide you with the information that you need to actually elevate your life, if that makes sense. They're still going to hold on to a lot of the biases they had when they were still here because they're a soul that's still growing and in transit. And so if you're looking for that information of like, what's my path and what's my purpose and why am I here and what do I do about my relationships? And, you have all those questions, your guide is going to be the one that you want to be connecting with. And so that's really what lights me up and that is what I focus on. Yeah.
Would you consider there to be a difference between the spirit guide and probably the more widely known or widely defined entity as the guardian angel?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and there is a big distinction. At least from my experience, I always say I never claim to know all the secrets of the universe. This is only just through my own experience, but we actually have both in my understanding. So your spirit guide is there from the time you were born. You make that agreement before your soul comes down. You're going to guide me through this life. You're going to help me, follow my ultimate path and purpose in this life. And if I get out of alignment, your spirit guide is going to be very aggressive in intervening in your life. They're going to send signs and symbols, of course, but they can shift circumstances for you, pull the rug out from under you if you're really out of alignment. This is where people have a lot of wake up calls, right? Big health scare, job loss, all of those things. That's your guide going, you're so out of alignment. You're ignoring all of your gut instincts. Like, let me push you in the right direction so that you have no choice, right? Your spirit guide's working in the background no matter what. Your guardian angel, it's a little bit more like they're not going to interfere with your life. Their role is to make sure you don't accidentally end your life too soon. So if we think about sort of like, they're like, our bodies are so fragile, right? And we're clumsy, and we're human. And so when you think about those stories, you hear about somebody who, like, a car rolled over them and they're like, I swear a hand grabbed me and pulled me out. I don't know how I survived that. That's more like your guardian angel. They're only going to come down if they absolutely have to intervene. And it's usually related to, saving your life, health related, that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Sure. So what one is kind of a guardian of your life itself, of your physical incarnation, and protecting that, whereas the other is more guiding your purpose and your structure of your life while you're here.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there is contention about what these things actually are, from kind of an aspect of yourself, of your subconscious mind, to a completely separate entity, where I would argue that we're all essentially part of one thing, but just kind of waved in an ocean, whereas others will believe that they are religious figures kind of outside of us. Some argue whether we have one spirit guide all of our life and all of our lives, or whether we have different ones, whether people who have passed over from our life become our spirit guides. What's your idea on what a spirit guide actually would be?
Yeah, I think I lean a little bit more towards your belief as well. And I've changed my opinion of this over time. And it's really, my opinion has changed just from, connecting with these beings as often as I do. And so the way I like to describe it is sort of like, yeah, if we sort of come to the understanding that all of it is a part of source, is a part of God, right? It's all one thing. And then we're all just sort of individuated pieces of that. Right? And so you and I are a piece of source, just as all of our spirit guides are a piece of source, and the angels are all a piece of source. It's all under the same umbrella. And so when we start to think about our spirit guides, and people ask me this all the time, like, how many spirit guides do I have? And I kind of go, I don't know that you necessarily have a different guide that's coming in every single time, because I'll channel for somebody multiple times and it'll look different every single time. Do they have 100 different guides? No, I think it's all source. We're connecting directly to God, right? And it's sort of this thing that kind of blows our mind to think, like, God's talking to me. Like, what? Like, I'm not a prophet. What does that mean? And I think that feels so distant for us, or almost too hard to conceive. And so the way I like to describe it is kind of like the piece of source that's directly assigned to you, the piece of source that's going to come through and offer a specific message, a specific image that represents your spirit guide in the time that you're connecting, to share the messages you need to hear in that moment. And as you grow and change and elevate, then maybe the next time you connect with your guide, it may look different. It's going to bring through a different image, because the message that needs to come through is different because you've changed. So I think it's really kind of like, yeah, it's hard to describe, right? Like, our brains kind of hurt trying to conceive it. And then there's also that question of, like, I have people ask me all the time, like, have my spirit guides lived with me in another lifetime? And the answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no. There are some guides who have always just only ever been up in that realm, in the spirit guide realm. And there are some guides who have said, actually, yeah, I was your sister in a past life, and you saved my life, and I've since ascended, and then I've dedicated my time as a spirit guide to help you ascend, right? And so we can have those delineations because, again, it's an individuated piece of source that has its own journey, just like us. We're a piece of source too that's having its individuated piece. So there is that. And then to answer that last little bit of, like, can people who have passed away become my guide? Typically, no. I would say, because I like to think that your spirit guide is with you from the time you're born, and that piece of source is guiding you all the way through your lifetime. However, I have seen it a couple of times, and it's sort of been when unfortunately, it's when it's a really early tragic death where it's like a soul where either they died as a child or really young and really unexpected and really suddenly. And usually in that case, it's sort of like a soul that was in their last incarnation. They came down just to do one or two more things, like they just needed to achieve a couple more goals, and then they will sort of finish life here on earth, if you will, finish their incarnation cycle, and then they ascend. And typically the next step for a guide or for a soul after they finish their incarnation cycle is spirit guide. That's usually the next level. Of course, we all have free will and you can choose to jump around. Many souls do. But the typical trajectory is you incarnate as a human over and over again, and when that's done, you've elevated to a point of a certain level of enlightenment. Then next level is spirit guide and helping other souls do the same thing. And so if a soul was in its last incarnation, they had a little bit left to do. Maybe they will pass away really young and tragically, and then they will, often it's like a child who will then go and become a guide to their parents. And that happens sometimes pretty often, or pretty often when it's in that case. But otherwise, no, usually it wouldn't have been a soul that was alive at the same time as you. Like if my grandma passes away, they can look out for me. I can talk to them. For sure, they're watching over me. Are they intervening in my life the same way a spirit guide is? No, not the same way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So I suppose a very important and very difficult moral question regarding this, which is a very common question as well regarding the religious context of God as a protector. If the spirit guides and guardian angels, which we're classifying as two different things, if they are present for everybody, then where are they, we would argue, for example, the children who are born in Africa with flies who lay eggs in their eyes from a young age, have all these chronic diseases, can't get enough food, can't get enough water for their entire lives, and they ultimately, either die young or in what we would consider unnecessary pain. If spirit guides and guardian angels are there to look after them, where would they be for those?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I hate to say this because this is probably the most frustrating answer to people, that your soul chose that. Right? But if you zoom out just a little bit, okay, and think about that each soul is having hundreds, if not thousands of incarnations here on the planet, okay, then their soul is choosing to have different types of experiences because the overall goal is to seek enlightenment. And so what does enlightenment mean? It's to get closer and closer to the idea of I am a piece of source, right? I'm not this individual thing that's all on its own, but that I am a piece of source. And there are different layers of getting to that, and really deep, true understanding of what does that mean to be an individuated piece of source, and getting closer and closer to this idea of oneness consciousness, and that I really am like connected, right? And so a soul will choose to have very, very different experiences because all of those added together help us have that broader picture and that deeper understanding. A soul often has to go through a series of many lifetimes where their entire lifetimes are merely about survival, right? Where it feels like the connection to source feels just so far away. And if they continue to have lifetimes like that, but they eventually cross that threshold of from here, like maybe there's some other being that's connecting, there is actually something that is looking out for me that I can connect to, right? Their soul makes that little jump, right? Then the next lifetime gets a little better, right? And it's not to say that, a soul who's dying in Africa is necessarily a young soul, but it's, from what I understand, it could also be an old soul saying, I never had that experience, or I need to be humbled in some way, right? There are lessons that our soul needs to learn, and there are different ways in which we go about doing that. And so if your soul had a lot of, and I don't want to say, I hate to say like, oh, it's karma. You killed someone in a past life, so now you're suffering in this life. It doesn't work like that, at least from my understanding. It's a little bit more along the lines of, my soul didn't learn this lesson very well. They didn't understand it from the circumstances it was in. So I'm going to put myself in a different circumstance so that I can really get to this deeper understanding of what it means to be a soul here on the planet, what it means to be a piece of source. And sometimes the best way to see God, unfortunately, or to understand God, is through suffering. And, everybody can say at any point in their life, I'm sure anybody can claim that the lowest point I had in my life was probably the point where I reached out and went, God, where are you? Right? And if everything was going smoothly and everything was so good and we didn't have that beautiful polarity, we would never seek it out. And so, I mean, it's probably the most frustrating answer. I like,
Well,
because we don't
I
want
can
to talk
understand
about
because
that,
because
but
I can understand because from a purely human point of view, it seems unfair, or I suppose putting the responsibility on it's like blaming the person themselves for their own suffering. And
yeah,
from a human point of view, that doesn't assume that there is a greater kind of thing behind being human. That would make sense. However, when we
yeah,
talk about that sort of explanation, we're assuming that explanation as a part of a much bigger aspect of reality that makes that necessary, even though from a human
yeah.
point of view, that seems like victim blaming in a way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I'll say, and I see this time and time again, some of the oldest souls here on the planet. And when I say oldest souls, like they've done, maybe thousands of incarnation cycles, getting ready to shift into another realm, potentially spirit guide, you'll see that they choose suffering at the beginnings of their lifetime. And so a lot of them end up, going through a process of drug addiction, right? Or some sort of, difficult upbringing, very difficult childhood. And it's like, but they overcome those things so quickly because those things are the things that make them seek source, make them seek a deeper understanding, and then they use that hurt and that pain to start helping other individuals to get to the other side and wake up to that realization. So some of the oldest souls are start off as drug addicts, believe it or not, and because they're saying I was seeking a god-shaped hole and didn't know how to fill it, right? So that was my way. So it's so annoying to think like, oh my god, I didn't choose this. Like I would never choose this for myself. But yes, your
But
soul
that's coming
did
from your
choose
human.
this.
That's coming from your human perception, which of course would
Right.
say that because you're living as if this is for the first time.
Right, exactly. But my soul, if I'm thinking about it in the grand trajectory of all of the lifetimes lived together with the one overarching theme of seeking enlightenment and connecting closer and closer to source, then yeah, it does make sense as a
Hmm.
piece of the puzzle.
Indeed, absolutely, from that perspective.
Yeah.
So, um, I think that's also why a lot of people who end up very spiritually wise often begin life, as you say, having these issues and often turn to religion and find religion to be very unfulfilling because that would then bring those questions to the forefront. If there's a God that loves us all, why does he grant prayers and wealth and wellness to some people, but ignore, the poorer countries where they have to bathe in the Ganges River that's full of human excrement and suffer all these things? Because then you're assuming that this God who has his own consciousness, his own self, and his own sense of morality is granting his will on some people, but choosing actively to ignore others. Even worse,
Yeah.
to send others to hell for not believing in him. And that, to me, is a lot more immoral and a lot more difficult to swallow than the idea that it's a big long process of spiritual evolution for one being that's splitting themselves off to experience themselves in different ways, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if we could have a little bit of a reframe, which is that nothing in my life is happening to me. It's all happening for me. And so anything that shows up in my life is a way of helping me grow and change. And it's the pressure cooker that my soul and the unique experience that my soul exactly needs to get to the next level. Then everything that happens in my life is actually a blessing. As hard as it seems in the moment, I don't know anybody who's had a really huge rock bottom and looked back and went, I wish that never happened. They always look back at it and go, I needed that to grow and shift and change and elevate in some way. And so, yes, we do need those things, and it's all happening for me. And, from the religious aspect of things, I mean, I was raised Jewish. I'm very Jewish. So from a Kabbalistic perspective and, deep Jewish mysticism, there's no hell. So maybe that, helps move some things away, right? Like actually everything's happening for you. There's only, seeking the ultimate truth and feeling really good. When you pass, you do just connect to source. At least that's my belief. And so, but it's hard to feel like there's this guy in the sky who's blessing some and punishing others based on my actions, right?
Not even
That
just
I think
actions,
can
but
be
also beliefs.
Right, and also my beliefs, absolutely. And I think that whether you believe in it or not, right? If I switch that mindset to it's all happening for me and I take complete radical responsibility for my life and go, I have the agency to change from this, right? And to grow from this, then everything that comes in my path is helping me do that. Is helping me move forward, and we move out of that victimhood mentality completely. It has nothing to do with my beliefs. I could say I'm an atheist, but if I still see that this challenge is coming my way to help me grow, then I've achieved something in my life. I've actually moved the needle forward.
This episode is brought to you by WTF Just Happened, a podcast by my good friend Liz Ensign. Both Liz and I share a passion for exploring life after death scientifically, so we've decided to support each other's work. In her podcast, Liz, a self-described sciencey skeptic, interviews everyone from scientists and parapsychologists to psychic mediums about evidence of life after death. She approaches each conversation with a skeptical, academic mindset, whilst remaining engaging and approachable. So if, like me, you enjoy serious, evidence-based discussions on life after death that still feel friendly and down to earth, you'll love WTF Just Happened. Be sure to listen to her podcast on your favourite platform and check out Liz's YouTube channel for more insightful discussions. You can also find her website at www.wtfjusthappened.net. So getting back to the phenomena of meditation, of mediumship in and of itself, one of the very difficult truths of the practice is that it is fraught with a lot of dishonesty and a lot of fraudulent, practitioners, etc., whether it be willfully or not so. And one thing that concerns me a lot, and it's no reflection on you whatsoever, but
No, go for it.
what concerns me is that people will see that you're doing this for the right reasons, absolutely, helping people out. They'll go to your website and they'll see $300 for 40 minutes, and they'll go, that seems excessive. What do you say to that? What would you say to that argument?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I do want to say this, that, when I hesitate to say that, someone goes into this work with the idea of how can I, swindle people out of their money. I think typically it's a pretty altruistic pursuit. And so then the question comes to, and that, the idea of them being, the information coming through not being truthful or not, for being too vague. I think that says a little bit more to do with the individual's training and their connection to their ability to connect, or their ability to get a really clear, concise message, and how clear their channel actually is, than rather the intentions behind it.
That's right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and certainly, I've spoken to many mediums, and they'll all say, as you did, the same thing, that you're receiving information. The difficult bit is translating it into a way that's accurate and not kind of influenced by your own mind, which I'm sure is a lot harder to do than it would seem.
Right. And I do want to say this, because I really don't think that there is these individuals who came down and, like, you are the chosen one, you're a medium, and you guys aren't, and you guys aren't. Everybody can do what I do. Okay, everybody. The question is, how much did you practice? How much did you strengthen those abilities, right? And what did you have to do? And so there are some, I say that I'm predominantly clairvoyant, but if I relied on clairvoyance alone, yes, the messages you would be getting would be so skewed, because I would be playing charades, guessing, what does a lion mean, right? Like, I would have no idea, and I would be trying to interpret from the images I was seeing, and I think that's where we get false messages, right? But then what I have done is I have worked to really, really strengthen the other clairs, so that I'm also hearing the messages the guides are speaking to me, in addition to showing me an image, in addition to sending physical sensations to my body, in addition to claircognizance and literally learning how to step back, so my mind goes so far back that I allow the guide to actually speak directly through me, to the point where I don't even remember what was said, because my brain takes a back seat. And so yes, it takes some training and it takes some time to learn how to do that, where I can completely move myself, my ego, myself, and any need to or hope to interpret at all to the background, and allow spirit to come through completely, as clearly as possible.
By which definition, you would certainly then be considered a channeler.
A channeler, yes. I really have to change that on my website. I am learning the more and more I do these podcasts. They're
It's
like,
just
Jessica,
it's,
it's not
a
a medium.
it's a game of words. It all means really the same thing. It's just to what kind of extent
Yeah.
and how people understand the terms. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think channeler would
absolutely.
be the
And
best label for you for what you
I
have
think
said you do.
so. I think so too. And then there's this other piece that people don't realize, and I teach this in my courses when, I help people, I coach people if they want to do this as a living as well. I coach you one-on-one and show you how to do it. And there are other things that you have to take into consideration. My entire life is based around trying to be the clearest channel and vessel possible, which means I have to eat extremely clean. I cannot drink alcohol. I cannot drink coffee, right? These are all things that can affect my ability to channel. And so I have to be really careful. I have to stay away from Wi-Fi, and my laptop's wired in. Like, I can't even have EMFs going on, right? So there's so many layers of, I have to tweak it just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. Yes, your intuition, everybody has access to it, but I'm working on and centering my whole life around being the clearest vessel I can possibly be. And so, yes, that takes some dedication for sure, and a lot of lifestyle shifts that are required for that, for sure.
And I think in the modern day, especially the way the world is at the moment, contemporarily, if that's the right word, money is a huge concern for people. I mean, the cost of living is beyond ridiculous at the moment. Over here, I'm sure, as well as over there. So when people will see, a 40-minute session for $300, they'll start to say, what justifies that?
Yeah. And that's fair question and a fair point. And I guess I would say to this, if the information that comes through, and this is not to toot my own horn, okay? But I do want to say that the information that's coming from your guides, in essence, is priceless, right? I mean, like, if they're going to tell you this is why you're here on this, like, in this lifetime, this is exactly what you're here to do, this is how you're here to help people, this is how you're supposed to, that your soul chose to live your life, here's the exact direction, and here are the next right steps. Here's step one, here's step two, here's the very, very specific things you need to do to make all of that happen and live completely in alignment. I mean, even if you just did it once, that is a priceless gift, right? And so it's not something that you have to repeat and come back every single week to do it. And it's like, just one session is going to shift everything.
Sure.
And so it's one of those things where maybe, yeah, you do save up for something like that. And then, I'd like to say that I value my energy. I can only handle doing one client per day. That's it. I will
Yeah.
not, and I
So
refuse.
that makes a big difference as well, because then you're bringing a concern of having to actually survive yourself as well.
Right. And I refuse it. It's an integrity thing, because it's not fair to a client to have a drained version of me, because it does. I don't want to say that it doesn't take something out of me to do this channeling, right? And so, if I want to give you my full undivided attention and give you everything that's going to come through, I need to be able to have the energy to do so. So yeah, one a day is max, and I won't see more than 3 to 4 people a week, because again, it can take that much out of you. So yeah, that's where that price comes in.
Sure, understandable. And as you say,
Yeah.
if you were kind of doing 3 or 4 clients a day and recommended they come back every week or so for the same price, then I would start to, alarm bells. But as you say, this is something that you perhaps only need to do once in your life.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, I always say, people, you don't need me, right? Like, you don't. There are so many ways that you can pick up those clues and those messages of, like, what am I supposed to be doing here? There's a lot of patterns that we are going to see in our life that are going to repeat themselves over and over again. The question is, the way I like to describe it is with our spirit guides, like, whether you're connecting to them and having somebody like me connect to them for you, or doing it yourself, they're going to interfere with your life regardless, whether you're aware of it or not. The question is, do you want to speed up the process? Do you want to be aware of it? The road is going to it can be bumpy if we're not paying attention. If we're so out of alignment, we're so not paying attention, we find ourselves in a corporate position that we're hating, but golden handcuffs, and we stay there, and our whole life is blowing up because of it. And you connect to your guide and they tell you, actually, I can give you the best example because it's just so staunchly different. It makes me laugh every time. I had a client, she was an accountant, okay? She thought she was okay with life, right? She was like, life is good. She had some health issues, which again, that's an alarm bell, right? If you're having health issues, it's your body saying, hey, don't go to work every day. This sucks, right? And I channeled her guides, and she got the weirdest message, and it felt so far away. And her guides were like, actually, you're an animal medium, and you're here to go to these animal sanctuaries and like animal preservations in all these different parts of the world, like in Costa Rica and in Peru and whatever. And you're supposed to channel for these animals to help through their recovery and what happened to them, and help these centers advocate for what's going on to the animal kingdom as humans are developing, city centers, things like that. And she told me, and she didn't contact me till about 2 years later, but she did. She sent me an email 2 years later. She goes, I thought that was the biggest colossal waste of my money. Like, she was like, that sounded so far away from anything I was doing. And she goes, and now I'm doing that thing. She went through a really big rock bottom. She had a huge wake-up call, and she's, through her own, choice, took classes and learned how to do this thing. And she's like, and now I'm an animal medium, and I just got called, and I'm getting paid and flown over to live in Costa Rica for the next 6 months to work at these animal conservation. She's like, I thought you were crazy. And now I'm doing that thing. So, sometimes it's one of those things where, like, we don't even know where we're supposed to be. We can be so far off from our purpose, and the spirit guide will just plant that seed. And it doesn't mean it's going to happen right away. For this woman, it took 2 years, right? But at least that seed is there, and it's in our back pocket, and we can kind of start to be aware of it. And when it shows up, we're more open to it.
And I think that's one aspect of mediumship that many people don't consider, but is probably a very important context on what the phenomena actually is, as well as what we are as individuals. And my last guest, actually, funnily enough, who's probably last week, I don't know when this is going up, but I'll say last week to be optimistic, Olivia was an animal communicator, an animal medium. And people often conflate the idea that, or often assume the idea that mediumship is only for human beings because we're special. Whereas, we pretty much know evolutionarily that we are essentially just very smart apes that evolved in a certain direction. That's what I would say. Right. And to me, that means that we are no different to the rest of the animal kingdom in our kind of our essence of what we are, which would make sense in the idea of everything being one, an expression of God or of consciousness or whatever that may be, that animals have just as internally, I suppose, a God spark of themselves. And so why wouldn't mediumship, life after death, psychic phenomena, etc., why would that not apply necessarily to creatures that have the same inherent spark as we do?
Exactly. I mean, it all comes back to that same question of we're all a piece of source and one delineated piece of that, right? And so, yes, everything on this planet, and I, if you dive deep enough into the spiritual community, there will be individuals who tell you can talk to trees and you can talk to plants, and the grass will tell you a story, and right, because it's all just energy. It's all just energy. And so, yes, we can connect to all of those things, and seemingly inanimate objects actually do have a life of their own and a whole world going on within them. And when you connect to that energy and you allow yourself to get quiet enough to really connect with it, then there's a lot that you can learn from being a piece of that. And it can be very humbling to realize, like, hey, we don't just rule the world here, right? It's not just us here.
and I often say, and I maintain that, if we were to watch the animals, and especially young children as well, they are closer to real source, to the essence of what we are than we are. So if you want to kind of see spirit as it actually is, you're better off looking at young children or animals to find it.
100%. They are the exact example of, I always say, children and animals are like our wayfinders. They're like our compasses of how we're meant to be showing up here. There's this really beautiful understanding in Judaism, or in Hebrew, the word for dog is actually kelev, or kelev, which means like a heart. And they're walking around so heart-centered that's how they show up in the world, right? It's not about thinking about it. It's about feeling it and leaning into it. And so they do act as those stunning examples of how we should be showing up, how we're here to experience the abundance of this world. And we don't overthink it, but we just feel it and we lean into it. And so 100%, I agree with you.
There's something very interesting that you mentioned that I wanted to ask about, is you mentioned that you have to avoid EVF and Wi-Fi.
EMF, yeah.
EMF and Wi-Fi and things like that. Now, to me, and I suppose to most people, when we think of mediumship and physical versus non-physical, we're thinking in terms of a dualistic idea. There's something out there that is, hard and material and follows the laws of nature, and then there's this other substance which gives us our consciousness and our mind, etc. Whether that's true or not, that's how most people think about it. So it'd be interesting to me that physical waves such as EMF, Wi-Fi, etc., can interfere with something that many people would consider non-physical and would not necessarily interact with a physical wave. So what do you think is of that?
Yeah. And again, it all comes back to everything is energy, right? It all has a life force within it. It all comes from the same source. And even one of the bigger, in addition to like not wanting the EMF to affect my physical body, because again, I'm focused on my body being the clearest vessel possible. And I don't want to have anything to skew my perception, right? Or even my mental clarity or create any sort of fogginess, if you will. But before I figured that out as one of the pieces, I would say spirit guides mess with the Wi-Fi like no other. When they come in, technology starts failing.
It's
and
very true.
and there's something about that. And so I don't know that I have a full explanation for that other than if we think of it through the idea of vibration, right? These beings of light are vibrating just a little bit higher than we are. They're from a different dimension, and the dimension is got a higher vibe. And so the things that are existing here through the vibration here on sort of these lower levels, if you will, can't hold it. If we sort of think of like a 20 watt, light bulb, and we're suddenly pouring 100 watts through it, it's going to explode. Right? So sort of that same idea, right? Of like these beings are coming through with so much and like our vessels just can't quite hold it. And so same with the technology. They just don't have the capacity to hold it necessarily.
And that's another good point, because a very common side effect, I suppose, for want of a better term, of a spirit communication or a deceased loved one visitation is lights flickering or digital watches going wrong, or as you say, internet problems. And again, it questions then if they are something completely separate, a spiritual energy is something completely separate from a physical energy, that interaction shouldn't take place, which again brings me, or shouldn't be able to take place, which again brings me to the question of maybe we are just all part of the same energy, just as you say, vibrating at different levels, because matter is essentially things vibrating, matter vibrating at a certain thing that makes it seem to be solid, whereas in reality it is just energy moving, I believe. And so at the core, scientifically speaking, we are all energy.
100%. And doing that argument, it's like trying to separate your soul from your body and saying these are two separate things. No, they have to work together, and they work in tandem. They're speaking to each other. And so we cannot actually differentiate the two. That's why I say, like, if you're getting sick, that's your soul trying to speak through your body. And the two are using each other. One is the vehicle that houses your soul, but it's also deeply intertwined and connected, right? And so same goes for any of these energies that we're saying are coming through. Like, they need vessels to hold them. And so when they come down, they're coming through something. Right? It's not just floating in the air necessarily. They need vessels to hold them.
Mm-hmm. Or at least to express them to us here in a way
to
we can understand.
express them. Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a better way of saying it.
So a question, again, that is probably dealing more on the philosophical side, but I think is especially relevant. One of my main interests is, in which case, if we are spirits that aren't reliant kind of on the body, but need it to kind of translate our whatever through the physical world, how come we can shove a chemical through the brain and we're gone? Anesthesia, or we get knocked on the head and we completely change. If we are not being produced by that brain and are existing separate from it in some way, why would that have any effect? And why would we expect there to be anything following death? What do you think about that question?
Yeah. It's a really deep question. I'm gonna have to think about that one for a second. I mean, it's really this question of like, what are we perceiving as infinite? The soul is what's infinite here. The body is simply the vessel that holds that. And while the body is housing the soul, they are intrinsically intertwined and expressing elements of that soul. But when you pass, your soul lives on, right? That's how we have all of these lifetimes, right? Over and over again. So yes, we do live in a fragile body that can be killed off pretty easily.
Yeah.
Right? And it can be altered pretty easily, as you say. And like we could take hallucinogenics and we could do all of these things. And so, but when your soul is being housed by the body, it's going to become an expression of that soul. So your body will then speak for it. But when it leaves and when it is, between bodies, if you will, it's still a piece of source. It doesn't, cease to exist. And then there's also something to be said about, my soul choosing a specific kind of body to express my soul's purpose in a certain way, right? Why did my soul choose a neurodivergent brain, right? Like, why do I have ADHD to the max, right? Versus somebody else. And I argue that, yeah, I think that does make me way more visual than the average person. And perhaps that helps me be a better channel. And so, do we choose specific brains to be better expressions or, more fine-tuned radios, as you said, to do that? So, and fulfill our purpose in a certain way. So yeah, it's
and it is a very philosophically deep question, I know, but I bring it up because the main argument against your gift as a medium is we know that's not true because we know our brains are all we are, and so it couldn't possibly be true. That's kind of the mainstream, at least over here in the UK especially, is more the mainstream idea. Not so much in the US and probably Canada, which is more religiously affiliated, I believe, but over here certainly so, especially in academics.
Yeah, yeah. I understand that. And you know what? I always say, like, I'm not in the business necessarily of convincing the skeptics, because I think that every soul needs to come to that realization on their own, and that very much has to do with your soul's journey, right? And so yeah, there are many lifetimes that a soul is never going to come to a realization that they are a piece of source, and that they do want to hold on to that belief of, like, it's only this and it's only this brain and it's only this body. And then I would say your soul probably has a few more lifetimes here. Right. And so, but when you do start to open your mind up and do maybe experience a spiritual awakening, or you do have a rock bottom moment that kind of brings you to source in some way, then that's your soul elevating a little bit more. And it's not to say that one is better than the other. It's just that it's where your soul is on the journey and what's needed for you to fulfill your purpose this time around. So yeah, I mean, that's why I'm never of the business of somebody coming in. If they're a client and they're like, my wife forced me to be here. I don't really believe in you, but I'm here because she told me to. I'm like, I don't know that I need to work with you.
Yeah. And probably,
and I'll turn you away.
A lot of people will say that if you're that staunch, then you're not going to be able to read them anyway because they're just so closed off.
Yes, it is much more difficult to channel for somebody who doesn't want to be channeled for. You do have to receive sort of permission, if you will. So it depends on, and then there's a question of, is it is it their ego that doesn't want to connect, but actually their soul is giving permission and a go ahead, and it's messages that they need to hear. And then sometimes it's actually very easy to channel for them because they are ready to hear it. They just don't think they are, or they don't want to believe they are. So it really depends on a case by case basis. But if you're there to sit there and like disprove everything that's coming through, then there's almost no point, and you are wasting your money because you're not going to take action on any of those messages that are going to come through. You're going to take all your time to explain away why that message came through.
Yeah. You're just going to use it as an opportunity to tell people that you've been scammed.
Exactly.
Whereas in reality, you just weren't at all interested in what was actually being said.
Right. And if I'm going to come through and your spirit guide's going to tell you, hey, like, you're supposed to quit your job and like go and do something that you never heard of, I mean, you're going to think, what a load of quack, right? Like, it's
and
not.
When that career change happens, you've already forgotten about that message because you never took it seriously in the first place. And so you never change your opinion.
Right, which is where I kind of get to the place of like, are the mediums the ones to blame, or when we're being told like, you guys are just swindling us out of our money and you're being fraudulent? Like, is it that, or is it really that we're channeling messages that you're not ready to hear?
And I think the argument of fraud, I mean, genuinely not malignant, genuinely the intention is to fraud people. I think that obviously does exist in mediumship, but I think people overlook the fact that exists in every other career in human history.
Right.
And probably not, I'd say almost certainly not more so than anything else in mediumship. But people will take advantage because people are idiots. But that doesn't necessarily. But
I'd like to think that, I know, like my like little heart would like to think that most people go into this with the altruistic purpose of helping people. But
not those
I'm sure there are a few. I'm sure there are. I'm luckily I've never encountered any of them, and thank God for that. But I'm sure it happens.
Yeah, but you can go to an accountant and get a fraudulent accountant who drains all of your income and gets you into big trouble. Doesn't mean that most of them are like that. It's very rare.
Yeah.
And I'd say it's the same in mediumship.
100%. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so where can people find your information, and where can they get hold of you if they wanted to invite you onto a podcast or even get a reading from you?
Yeah, so you can definitely check me out on my website at jessicarachel.co. You can book sessions there if you want to have a session with me. And just for your listeners, we have a coupon code. You can use podcast20 to get 20% off your first session. And if you're wanting to dive just a little bit deeper into this and you're like, I don't want you to just do the work for me, I want to be able to connect with my own guides and maybe even do this for other people, I do private one-on-one coaching to teach individuals how to do that. And then you can use the coupon code podcast500 to get $500 off of that, and we can work together. So
Perfect.
yeah, you can also seek me out on Instagram at I am Jessica Rachel.